Across the country, employers are facing workforce shortages, changing skill demands, and real questions about how to grow in a competitive economy. Here in Maine, we're not just talking about those challenges, we're exploring ideas and partnerships that will shape what comes next. I'm Dan Belyea. I lead the Harold Alphonse Center for the Advancement of Maine's Workforce, a program of the Maine Community College System. And welcome to Maine Ideas. Our podcast focuses on workforce, business, innovation, and brings together leaders who share what's working and how Maine and the nation continue to grow. So let's get comfortable, stay curious, and let's explore what's possible together. Today's conversation focuses on redemption, public safety, and the role workforce development can play in helping people successfully return to their communities. Commissioner Randy Liberty leads the Maine Department of Corrections and has spent more than 4 decades in public service, with a career shaped by law enforcement, military leadership, and a deep belief in second chances. This episode will talk about restorative justice, the importance of treatment, education, and vocational training, and how Maine can build safer, stronger communities by creating real pathways to work and stability. Such a great honor to talk with you today on the Maine Ideas podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the invitation.
Thank you very much. So, Randy, if that's okay for me to call you Randy.
It is.
Give us some idea of what brought you into the field of corrections and the work that you're currently doing.
I've been at it for a while. I began 44 years ago, and I really followed my brother into the Army, and he was a military policeman. And I went to visit him at Fort Evans, Massachusetts, and I liked what he was doing. He was serving his community, he was serving in the military, and so that's how I started. And after 3 years of doing that in the Army, I knew that I wanted to serve my community back in Maine. And I went to work at the Fairfield Police Department, and that eventually led me to working in the Somerset County Jail. And here I am 44 years later, the Commissioner of Corrections.
What keeps you motivated in all of the work that you've done to do the work you're doing currently?
Yeah, for me, I've been fortunate to be promoted along the way. I was sheriff, I was warden, commissioner, and sergeant major in the Army. And all of those positions have given me an opportunity to exert influence and try to do the right thing and try to serve the people of the state of Maine. And what motivates me now is when I talk to residents that are being successful, spending the time that I did on the street as a law enforcement officer, I saw many people in difficult circumstances and some of them making some mistakes and being incarcerated as a result of that. But it's so nice for me to be able to work with my team and provide treatment, programming, education, and to see them successfully transition back into the community. And I love to see people in Walmart and say, "Hey, Commissioner, good to see you." And I check in to see how you're doing. And they said the treatment programming, vocational training that they had made all the difference in their lives and that they are their families. And as a result, we've made their families safer, the community safer and stronger. And that really feeds me.
Yeah. And that really led me into that next question I was asking. Why is this so important right now?
Yeah, it's really important, I think, that if we care about our communities, making our communities safer, building families, making them stronger, I believe in redemption. And so when people make a mistake, I believe that they can be redeemed. And I find that most people believe in redemption. And I can be in a position where individuals that may have substance use disorder or may have mental health issues or whatever their need may be that are incarcerated, it's important for me that the taxpayer get a good return on their investment and individuals are released healthier than when they arrived.
And as you're saying that, it brings me to the word that we keep hearing about restorative justice. And sometimes I think we think it as a buzzword, but give us your definition of restorative justice.
Yeah, we have restorative practices are embedded throughout all of our system. And I'm fortunate, I teach at University of Maine at Augusta, and one of the classes I teach is restorative justice. And I've been able to implement that throughout our system. And what that really means is having a victim-oriented discussion with the person that may have caused harm. And it's really on the terms of the victim or the survivor of a crime, where they can have a conversation in a non-adversarial sort of environment, a safe environment. Why did you do this to me? And what were the circumstances surrounding what happened? And it gives them a broader understanding of the totality of the circumstances, who the person is and what may have led to this. And it also gives the person that may have caused the offense the ability to apologize, to try to make it right. What can I do to heal this harm? And that's really what it's about. It's about having a conversation, having a greater understanding, try to find ways to heal the harm that's been done to the community and the individual. And we get really good outcomes when we're involved in restorative practices.
Yeah, I was really impressed with the one of the pieces in your book, and I will get to that. Randy has a book that's just been released on Liberty's Prison, the inmate's son who's radically reformed an American prison system here in Maine. And one of the pieces that you just mentioned was a quote in the book about always keep the victim in mind. And I think that's such an important piece of the bigger conversation. What are you seeing as the most pressing workforce challenges or opportunities here in Maine as it relates to corrections and law enforcement?
I think that one of the biggest challenges is our aging population. And as our population ages, it's sometimes difficult to fill those roles with all the tenure and wisdom that individual may have had over the decades that they worked. That's a challenge. One of the opportunities I see as a great opportunity is working with veterans that are coming off active duty from
Mhm.
the military, and trying to do the best we can to reach out to them and let them know that as they transition, which can be a challenge, we have a home for them. And at the Maine Department of Corrections, we can leverage their skills and their experience as team leaders, as a proven employee serving in the military, and they can find a home in a paramilitary organization that values their skill set. So I continue to try to work with veterans as they release from active duty. I think that's a really good opportunity. But again, I think the aging population is a challenge. And in corrections, nights, weekends, holidays, the demands of the job can be challenging. And so we work every day to try to create an environment in the prison system that is a sustainable career for individuals that are in our employment.
Is there some specialized recruitment system or process that you have implemented that's really assisting in drawing those individuals for employment in the Maine Department of Corrections?
We work with the Department of Labor, and individuals go there and they know that we have an opportunity. So we do job fairs, we do all of that. We do the Hire a Vet program with the Department of Labor. That's worked really well. We also work with the Roots to Roots, which is an
Mhm.
organization which works with individuals that are releasing from active duty and provides them with information of potential employees.
Excellent. Give us some examples of some of the partnerships that are working in Department of Corrections.
For me, the rock star really in partnership is Maine Community College. The work that we've been doing collaboratively to ensure that individuals have a livable wage and have a trade on the outside has been priceless. And so things like the establishment of a commercial driver's academy at Mountain View, working with the community college for things like NCCER, which is construction trade certifications, the badging that we've been doing, taking small incremental skill sets and to be able to badge people. Those relationships with the community colleges have been really important for people transitioning back. And one of the things that I really enjoy about the community college system is they're geographically dispersed. So wherever someone returns in Maine to their community, there's a community college that's in the area that's affordable, is professional, provides them with the trades and the skills that they need to be successful on the outside. And we know that in order for people to transition successfully, they have to have housing, they have to have a job that's a livable wage, and treatment and programming if they need that. And that's what's really one of the legs of the three-legged stool that makes us successful. And the community college does that for us.
Appreciate that. Tell us more about the barriers that residents have on departing a facility that you oversee.
Yeah, anyone that is in the Maine Department of Corrections, they have a felony record. And so the stigma surrounding that, the stigma for them to be in the public's eye when the crime may have been committed or in the judicial process, and people may not give them a second chance. And I think that they certainly deserve to have a second chance. And so housing can be an issue if they do a records check and they see that an apartment owner or homeowner may not give them the opportunity, or an individual may not have a trade or a skill that they need to have a livable wage, and they return back into the community as bad off as they were. So really it's about housing, vocational programming, and having access to treatment or program if they need that.
And our listeners, what can our listeners do to support an individual who's departing?
I think
And
that if we can get away from the stigma of someone being incarcerated and believing that they're a throwaway, that's just not the case. We need to step away from that. We need to realize that 99% of the individuals that are incarcerated today, both in the county jails and in the prison system, will be returning back to our communities. And really, the question is, how can we successfully help them transition back rather than put them in a situation where they have a high return to custody rate. And through education and programming and treatment, if someone obtains a college degree at the Maine Department of Corrections, they have a 0.05% return to custody rate. Very successful. And what that means to me is 0.05% someone in the community is re-victimized. And so it's really the avoidance of future crimes or victimization of people in the community. So I think that if you can provide housing, if you have the ability to do that, give them a chance. If you can provide work and opportunity so they can have a career, raise their families and have a livable wage, I think that goes a long ways.
And what's the percentage of folks who enter Maine Department of Corrections that will be released eventually?
99%, very few. I release now about 700 individuals back into the community, and they release everywhere in Maine. And we want them to be good neighbors and good citizens, contributing citizens. And the way we do that is through programming, treatment, and education.
Awesome. So I think it's important to hear the data around that because folks are returning, and in what position do we want them to return in so that they can live their best selves. Along with transportation housing, can we touch a little bit upon the medical assisted recovery program that you've got operating within the system? A little bit about when it started, the results, and some of the great things that are happening around that.
As I said, I've been in the industry for 44 years. And when I was sheriff of Kennebec County, we spent a lot of time on drug enforcement. And that was one part of the solution to be able to get those that are distributing drugs illegally in the state of Maine and bring them into custody. But as my career evolved and as I matured as a person, I realized that's really not where it's at. Where it's at is about treatment. It's about providing treatment in the community prior to something happening. And so we created a program called the CARE program, Criminogenic Addiction Recovery Academy, at the jail. And in 2015, when I arrived at the prison as the warden, it was obvious to me that 65, 70%, 80%, depending on the population, were there because of addiction. And it was obvious to me that we needed to do something. And so myself and Ryan Thornell, my deputy at the time, the deputy here at DOC, we began working on medication-assisted treatment. When Governor Mills was elected to office in 2019, she appointed me as commissioner, and her first executive order was to expand Maine Care, which provided an additional 140,000 Mainers access to treatment. And then her second executive order was to ensure that we had universal medication for substance use disorder in all our correctional facilities in the state of Maine. And so when we received that executive order, that gave us the green light to really take off and work collaboratively to provide medical medicine for people that are addicted. And so we began that journey, and we have now arrived to a place many years ago now that if someone arrives and they have an addiction issue and they have a script for the medication, we honor that. If they arrive and they've been self-medicating, we give them an appointment with a physician, and it's a clinical decision whether or not that would be helpful in their recovery. They can remain on that medication along with the programming for as long as they wish, as long as it makes medical sense for them to do that. And that allows them to focus on other treatments and education and work inside the facilities. And then we provide a warm handoff, a group called Groups Recover Together. We've partnered with them, and they have an appointment with the resident before he transitions. And then there's a warm handoff for that group. And doing that, so there's no break in continuity for treatment, we've been able to reduce the overdose death rate by 60% for people releasing. It just makes good sense to treat people. It's the gold standard, really, to treat people and provide that for them as they transition back into the community.
Yeah, and it really leads me to this next question about, you mentioned programming happening within the system, and there's a whole list of things that you've been doing, and it's really outlined in the book that you just released. Can you dive into some of those areas, such as the dog handling, the gardening, the yoga? I think the list goes on, but could you touch upon those?
Sure. I'm proud that our organization, my team members, we're all low barrier. So if someone arrives and they have a good idea, let's try it, let's pilot it. And so we do that. And so some of the things that you mentioned, I had an individual, I was teaching a class or I was visiting a class at UMA. It was a restorative justice class Dr. Bernheim was teaching. And I explained the transition that we were doing when I was warden there. And a gentleman named Kevin raised his hand and he called me out. He said, "That's not the prison that I was in," because he had done 8 years. And I invited him down. I said, "Come on down and see what we're doing." And he accepted my invitation. And when he saw the transformation that had occurred over the last 2.5 years at that point, he asked if he could bring his friends in and pitch a proposal to me regarding a program they were doing. And so they had been trying for a couple of years in Vermont to bring in the Liberation Institute, which is a nationally certifying yoga instruction program. And they pitched it to me. And I said, how much does it cost? And they said, nothing. I said, let's do it. And so we began that journey, and we've been able to certify 18 nationally certified yoga instructors that are residents. And it's been transformational. If I go in and teach yoga in one of the units, they look at me like I've got no credibility. But someone that rolls in, that's one of them that has traveled the journey that they've traveled, significantly transformed those units. And so that's been really good. When I was the sheriff of Kennebec County, I'm a military veteran also, when I had the opportunity to serve in Iraq. And when I came back, I had post-traumatic stress. And I was in the infantry. I fought in Fallujah for 10 months. And I knew then the impact of war. And so I created a veterans pod in the Kennebec County Jail, and worked with Justice Nancy Mills, and she established the Co-occurring Disorder Court, the Veterans Court, and we did that work. And when I took the job as warden at the prison, I also created a unit there. And so individuals that, if they get state time, they can transition from Kennebec County Veterans Unit to the unit at the Maine State Prison, and they share the same location with people that have a shared experience of combat. And just that soft affiliation, and the Vietnam veterans being able to speak with the Afghan and Iraq veterans is really helpful. And then we established the Brian Bucher American Legion post inside that unit. And that brought Legionnaires from the outside in to help mentor those other veterans. And then we brought in the America Vet Dogs. And so the veterans on the inside are certified canine trainers, and they train those dogs for 14 months. And I was a canine handler on the outside as a law enforcement officer. These are the cleanest dogs I've ever seen. Turn on a light, go get you something out of the fridge, nudge you if you're having a nightmare. Just really super companions and service dogs. And once those dogs are trained, they're released to veterans on the outside. And that allows the veterans that are incarcerated to continue to give back to their community that way. Some other things we've done is that when I arrived at the prison, I saw that there was a lot of grass, a lot of lawns. And I asked my staff if we were grass farmers. And so I'm a master gardener, and I brought in the cooperative extension, University of Maine Cooperative Extension, and they taught more than 120 of my residents to be master gardeners. And so we tilled up the land. I didn't have any money for anything, and I didn't want the budget to prohibit what we were doing. So I tried to find low cost, no cost ways to do things. And I went to Moose Crossing in Waldoboro, and I asked them if they had any post-retail seedlings, the leggy tomato plants that are a little too big and people won't buy them. And the first year, they gave me 3,000 pepper plants and 4,000 tomato plants. We planted those for nothing. And then I jumped in the dumpster, and I saw a bunch of organics that were being thrown away, and we were paying $140,000 to have all of our trash brought to the Waldoboro transfer station. So I brought in the Maine Compost School, and Mark gave us a training and certified some of our folks to be composters. And we reduced our tipping fees by $100,000 by composting our organics and rotating those back in the soil. And here we are 9 years later. And when you roam around the Maine State Prison and Mountain View and elsewhere, it looks like the Better Homes and Gardens. And it gives the residents endless salad bars. And so there's no portion control. Take as much salad as you want, tomatoes and cucumbers and lettuce. And that's gone very well and made a difference in the facilities. I could go on if you wish.
Yeah. And what a great way. Yeah, absolutely. And what a great way to provide nutritious food in a system that notoriously has been providing food that's just isn't healthy
No.
for individuals in the system. No, I just very impressed with what you've done. I've actually been on tour with you and have experienced it firsthand. If we can dive a little bit into your book, I'd like to make that transition. I picked your book up on Friday. I couldn't put it down.
Oh,
And
wow.
matter of fact, we went out to a movie, and I had the last chapter to do.
Oh, no.
And I said, I've got to finish this because I couldn't put it down. Tell us the inspiration behind the book.
Sure. So when I was warden of the prison, Edward Tick, a published author regarding post-traumatic stress with combat veterans, he has 3 books, and he wanted to speak to the veterans in the prison. And when he arrived, he and I spoke for an hour or so, and then I brought him to the veterans pod. And when he returned to New York, he shared his story of his trip with Christine Graff, his assistant. And she emailed me and said, Randy, the fact that you visited your father in 1971 as a 7-year-old when he was an inmate, and then you returned 44 years later as the warden, that's a story. And have you considered writing a book? And we started that journey. And it was very interesting. I think it was important for me for a few reasons. I think it was important to share that regardless of where you start in the world, you don't have to stay there. I think it's a story of resiliency from my mother, who dropped out of school in ninth grade, and she was pregnant at 15, 17, 20, and 22. Her husband was an alcoholic and had criminogenic thinking, broke a lot of laws, and did a bunch of time off and on. And her resiliency to get us through those difficult times. And she always says, this too shall pass. And so it's a reminder of whatever challenges you may have right now, you'll get through them. And she also says that I've had a lot of worries in my life and very few have come true. And it's a reminder again to me that you'll get through these things, and the things we worry about, you don't necessarily have to.
Yeah, I was just blown away by the role modeling behavior from your mom and the things that she stood very clear on. And I won't sneak out all the stories in the book, but I was just really impressed. It actually brought tears to my eyes on several parts about how staunch she was about making sure all four of you boys were going to grow up to be good citizens. And the examples that you illustrate in the book, it's very, very clear that you didn't hide any of the information about what went on in your childhood. And it really obviously is grounded in the work you're doing today. It's very impressive. I would love to meet your mom someday. She just seems like an incredible person. And I was really blown away by the pieces that I learned about her. I understand that she earned an associate degree at Kennebec Valley Community College.
That's correct. She was very well read. She always had a book in her hand, and she inspired the love of reading to all of us. And really important to her that we were well informed, educated, and read. And when the last child left the home, my sister Steph, my brothers and I paid for her tuition to go to KVCC. And she always loved to rear children. She loved her grandchildren, and she loved mothering. And so she obtained a degree in early childhood development, and that opened the doors for her to work for KV Cap. And she was a home visitor for young moms. So that young mother comes home, doesn't have the supports that she may need. And my mother would grab the baby and say, it's okay, this is what you do, this is how you do that, and all the tricks of the trade. And it really fed her soul to be able to help young moms that were in difficult circumstances, and it really redeemed her, I think, and educationally. And she was able to get her GED at the time, and then an associate degree. She's a college graduate now, which she never thought was possible. And the KVCC provided that opportunity for her. She loved going there, and she loved the instruction, and she felt as though she was redeemed educationally.
Yeah, that's so wonderful. The story is so impactful. Tell us about some of the other role models you illustrated in your book.
Yeah, so what really was helpful for us when my father was incarcerated, and then later they divorced, and we were alone in the house, and very difficult times. And so, what was very impactful for me were the positive male role models that I had for teachers. Was Mr. Grenier, Willie Grenier was one of them in fifth grade, and Steve Hunter was another in fifth grade. And then we had football coaches and track coaches, Dave Martin and Ray Winship, all these individuals that really showed for us and modeled for us what a good man, a respectful man, a responsible man, how he acted, how he spoke, how he treated women, all of that. And that was very helpful for us along the way. And then, of course, when I joined the Army, there's no shortage of supervision there. And so those delicate years between 18 and 22, all that guidance was very helpful to me. And then, of course, the Army gave me the GI Bill, and I was able to go to college, and it really worked out well. I went to KVCC for an EMT course, and I attended University of Maine at Augusta, loved the professors there, and it's just been a gift.
Yeah, it's really cool to hear. I've got to tell my own lesson learned story to you, Randy, and I think I've said this to you before. I remember coming to visit the Maine State Prison when you were the warden back in 2018, maybe it was 2017. And my first visit was talking about some work I thought we might be able to do together. And we met in the lobby. And there was a young lady sitting on one of the benches that was visiting. And you told the group of us to head down the hallway towards where your office was, that you needed to talk to this person, this young lady that was sitting on the bench. So I walked down the hallway and I said, the warden's got to have a conversation with this person to say, behave yourself, don't be messing around. And so I went in your office and sat down, and you came back and you said this. You said, sorry I'm late getting to you folks, but it was her first visit here at the Maine State Prison. And from that point on, I said, I get it. I get what's going on. And I tell that story as much as I can when someone asks me about who Randy Liberty is. And
Mm.
that will stay with me forever because it was like that. It changed my thought process. And as I learn more, I'm just simply in awe about the work you're doing and the change that's happened in the system. And want to say thank you for all of that work you've been doing. I think the other piece that I got out of your book was the many changes that you've made in your career. And you mentioned them before: command sergeant major, deputy sheriff, sheriff, commissioner, veteran, diver, canine handler. I think I've probably missed a few, but it's all in the book. And if you read the book, you'll get to experience all of it. Tell us about those shift changes that you made in your career that could help others who are doing some of those similar things.
For me, it was always about looking for opportunity to serve in a better way. And you mentioned rescue diving, and I was a patrolman, and in the town of Chelsea, there's a Togus Pond, and there was an aircraft that crashed. I was the first one there, and I was at the time I was a recreational diver, and the aircraft crashed, and I waited for an hour and a half for the official dive team to show up as for recovery. And so I said to myself, we can do better than this. We can go in the golden hour. We can try to rescue people, save people. And so, again, no money at the sheriff's office. And so I went to the sheriff, asked him if I could attend a training in Bowling Green, Kentucky. And sure, no money, but you can drive an unmarked cruiser down to Kentucky. And I stayed in the National Guard Armory because it cost me nothing. I slept on a cot for 2 weeks, and I become certified as a public safety scuba instructor. So that allowed me to, and I taught this class at KVCC, by the way, they let me teach in the evening. And I was able to take firefighter, EMT, law enforcement types that were non-divers and train them how to be rescue divers. And at one point, we had 34 rescue divers in Kennebec County with all their equipment in the trunks, both firefighter, EMT, and law enforcement types. And over the years, I was able to certify as a diver that could go onto the ice, underwater investigator, rapid water, nighttime, more than 100 feet. And over the years, I pulled 19 victims from lakes, rivers, and streams, just trying to find another way to serve the community when someone's in a desperate sort of situation. There are a lot of circumstances where, I taught the DARE program. I was concerned about drugs. I worked in the schools trying to do some diversion work with the youth. And then I spent a lot of time doing search warrants and trying to rid opiates from the streets of Kennebec County. And so there are a lot of opportunities like that. The other piece was I was a canine handler, and I'm not a dog guy. And Bosco was handled by one handler for 6 months, and then that gentleman got out of law enforcement, so the dog was there. And then another deputy grabbed him for 8 months, and that didn't work out. And so I was the third handler. And Sheriff Frank Hackett, back in '91, said to me, called me in his office, said, You're gonna be the next canine handler." And I said, "Not really a dog guy." And he said, "Did I ask you if you're a dog guy?" And I said, "No." And so I became the next handler. But the beauty of that was the 3 years that I had him was that we were able to find lost Alzheimer's patients. We were able to find lost children. The beauty of and the satisfaction of trying to serve the community in that way. And one of the non-traditional ways that as sheriff that I served the community was I recognized food insecurity was a big issue. So I worked with the Department of Agriculture, and they leased me 40 acres of land here in Augusta, and we let the residents out and we farmed that. And each year we could do about 50 to 75,000 pounds of produce. We brought it directly to the food pantries and soup kitchens to help food insecurity in our communities. And so that's the kind of thing I was just always looking for, an opportunity of how I can serve. Where is there a void? What can we do? And I have always found, and I like this quote, the harder you work, the luckier you are. And it's true. If you work hard, if you grind, if you contribute, if you educate, if you program, and if you look for opportunities, you can be successful and maybe be promoted. And if you're promoted, it gives you enhanced influence to make the world a better place.
Yeah, that's so awesome. As we're starting to close up, what is the best piece of advice that you've ever received? And there may be a couple of them, but go into that a little bit for us.
Yeah, the best advice I ever received was what I just quoted. The harder you work, the luckier you'll be. And I've tried to use that as a foundation for anything that I do. Working hard means doing whatever you're doing right now the very best that you can, and having that perfect effort, really trying, digging down. That doesn't just mean occupationally, but that means as a father, as a spouse, as a soldier. I really try to do the right thing and work hard every day. And in the end, those rewards will come. And for me, the reward is being promoted and having more influence. Because when you're at the bottom of an organization or in the middle of an organization, I and many people look up at the top and say, if I was in charge, things would be different. Well, I've had the gift of being able to be in charge, and it's been a wonderful experience to allow team members the freedom to make mistakes, the ability to help train them and raise them up and create a succession plan so they can be successful, providing opportunities for them and a safe environment to work in. So all of those things have been foundational to what I've done.
Thank you. And as the last question I have is, what is one call to action or piece of advice that you'd like to leave with our listeners?
I would like to let the listeners know that the residents that are in my care, those that are incarcerated, the 2,100 that are in the Maine Department of Corrections now, it's really important not to judge them on their worst day. We all know that we've all made mistakes and we all believe in redemption when it pertains to us. But please have an open heart and be forgiving to those that have harmed the community or harmed someone in some way, and give them the opportunity to redeem themselves, providing them with an opportunity for housing, for treatment, for a sustainable job. And I think that our communities and our state of Maine will be much better for it.
Thank you, Randy. And if I can just put a little plug on the book that you just released, it is so impressed to hear the story, to hear about the programming, to hear about your life and how it's directed you to do some really cool things here in the state of Maine. And obviously, it's an example for the nation. Randy, thank you so much for being on our podcast. You're a good and kind person.
Thank you for having me.
And if you'd like to learn more about the Harold Alphon Center for the Advancement of Maine's Workforce, please visit mccs.me.edu. And if you'd like to learn more about today's guests, be sure to check out our show notes for links and additional resources.